Rally underway right now with these numbers hitting the tape. The Dow Industrial is now up 532 points right now. Cheryl Cassoni with the numbers. Boom.
So we've got some good news coming out of the economy from yesterday and today, and it blows all the leftist lines right out of the water. Welcome to another edition of Spark the Conversation. This is your host, Mark the Spark, bringing you today's news. We are going to cover a visit from Ireland's Choctadala, if I pronounce that right. We're going to get into some of the economy, some of the numbers that have come out recently, questions about Joe Biden's pardons and his signatures looking kind of suspicious, the tariff war with Canada, among other things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with a friend, leave a comment below. Let's get into it. So some better than expected news out of the economy just today. There's the prices, the inflation has gone up less than expected, which is a good marker out of the economy. Something that we're not used to hearing, right? For like something actually coming out better than expected. And even CNN has to admit the good news. Here's that clip.
Finally, we have some good news on the economy and really the number one issue for many Americans, the cost of living. So we just learned that consumer prices in February increased by 2.8% year over year, 0.2% month over month. Both of these figures were a step in the right direction and both were better than expected. So this is definitely very encouraging to see because it's going to, I think, relieve some fears that inflation was perhaps re-accelerating, because this actually breaks a streak of 4 straight months where I think you could see it on the chart all the way to the right, where the inflation rate was going in the wrong direction, right? It was going higher and higher. Finally, we're seeing it dip.
So despite all the fear-mongering and the scare tactics of the left, talking about the things that Donald Trump being a scary, dangerous decisions that he's making, we're actually going in the right direction. And here is the continuation of the clip we started with, talking about how the market responded to these reports.
Rally underway right now with these numbers hitting the tape. The Dow Industrial is now up 532 points right now. Cheryl Cassoni with the numbers. Boom, Cheryl.
We've got a market-moving report, Maria. Everything coming in lighter than expected. Inflation is easing, according to this report, for February. Month over month, we got a gain of 0.2%. The street was looking for a gain of 0.3%. Take a look at those numbers. We came in 2.8% year over year. Expectation was 2.9%. Core month over month, again, lighter than expected, up 0.2. We were looking for 0.3. And then core year over year, also lighter than expected, 3.1%. The street was looking for 3.2%. We did see, you were talking about the energy story, a little bit of a drawdown in gasoline prices. New vehicle prices fell month to month. Gasoline prices fell month to month. Housing, that's still kind of a sticky issue in here, but it's a pretty nominal jump overall. But that's usually the biggest piece of that shelter component. You guys were talking about that really quick. Let me give you this. So basically half of the all items increase for the month was shelter for the month of February, but it was offset by a fall in airline fares, and also we had a 1% decline again for that gasoline number. So you still had overall the energy index just jumping just a little bit, 0.2%, but because you had electricity and nat gas prices increase a little bit. But overall, the market seems to really like this report, Maria. Back over to you.
So obviously, the people investing are not listening to the leftist media and the leftist politicians that are trying to spread fear, false fear over a downturn in the economy, which we're not really seeing. Now, I think that we are in a cycle of the economy where we're going to see a lot of fluctuation. You're going to see it do some wild things. And the market always does wild swings depending on what's out in the news at the time. Markets respond to reports and things in the news very quickly. But overall, you have to watch trend lines. And so we're going to see some wild spikes. We saw some wild dips the other day with tariffs. We saw some spikes today because of the news of the economy and the numbers coming out better than expected. And it's going to happen. Now, ultimately, I think almost everybody who understands the economy and the markets know that it's been overvalued for a long time. We had the Biden administration pumping a lot of money into the economy, which gives false numbers, and people will invest based on that. And then when it comes down, they all realize it will. They're just trying to beat the fall. And so that results in those wild swings because everybody's going to be pulling their money out to try to beat it and try to, win the system. But ultimately, we need to see a rebalancing of the stock market. It just needs to happen. So Donald Trump is trying to make that happen as smoothly as possible by putting, inspiring or not inflating, but invigorating the economy. He's trying to invigorate the economy so that there isn't so much of a disparity between the market and the actual, economy, the effects of the economy and business. So rather than, rebalancing by the numbers of the market needing to come down, he's going to inflate the business up to match the numbers of the markets. So that is another tactic that he is using. Now, that brings us into the tariffs. We talked about the effect they've had on the markets, and there's been some back and forth, a little bit of trade wars. Now, there's questions on what the plan of Donald Trump are, and he's mentioned it and continues to mention multiple different things. We're not really sure what his main priority is because he said one is to make countries secure their borders to prevent fentanyl from coming into our country. One is to make the United States rich, which he said that a couple different times. And the other is to bring business back to America. So it's really kind of tough. He's also mentioned the differential between tariffs that other countries charge on our exports versus what we charge on theirs. And that is a very tricky subject. It's not so simple as, 1% this country and 2% this country. It really has a lot more to do with, it's a lot more nuanced than that because it's broken down by the type of products, and other countries want to tariff our exports that match, what their main industry is in their country. So it's very, very nuanced more than that. But regardless, here is a clip talking about those, a Fox News report talking about the tariffs.
CEOs and Wall Street lenders who are in Washington are seeking market reassurance. They're also seeking some clarity on the president's foreign trade vision. This evening, the administration, they paused a plan to hit Canada with additional tariffs that would have gone into effect tomorrow morning.
The tariffs are going to be throwing off a lot of money to this country.
The president faces America's top corporate leaders on a day marked by rapid-fire tariff threats exchanged with Canada. This morning, President Trump revealed plans to double existing duties on Canadian aluminum and steel imports to 50%. Retaliation for Ontario Premier Doug Ford imposing a 25% tax on electricity exports to the U.S.
The temperature needs to come down.
By 3 p.m., Ford temporarily suspended the tax.
Rather than going back and forth and having threats to each other, we have both agreed, let cooler heads prevail. We need to sit down and move this forward.
That sit-down with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is scheduled for Thursday to hammer out a renewed United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Outside the White House, President Trump shared that Ukraine has accepted a ceasefire plan and that the ball is now in Russia's court.
Hopefully Russia will agree to it. We're going to meet with them later on today and tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be able to wipe out a deal.
The president added that Ukrainian President Zelensky is welcome back to the White House.
So I let that play a little bit beyond our main topic just because there was a lot of useful information in there. And we'll get into the Ukraine peace deal a little bit in the show later in the show. But here's another clip of Doug Ford talking about the tariffs that they have now backed off of, the electricity tariffs. And we'll get into some further tariffs that Canada is going to impose in different areas. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I don't see a path where Canada wins, but clearly they don't want to let that on. That'll be the case.
Well, just a little while ago, I had an opportunity to speak to Secretary Lutnick. And Secretary Lutnick has sent out an olive branch to us to come down and immediately meet with him, meet with the whole trade administration, and discuss the future. Rather than waiting till April the 2nd, threats going back and forth, tit for tat. I've agreed to suspend temporarily, and we always have that tool in our toolkit, until we sit down over the next day or two. I'll be heading down to Washington along with Dominic LeBlanc, and we'll have a good discussion. You know, with any negotiation that we have, there's a point that both parties are heated and the temperature needs to come down. And I thought this was the right decision. They understand how serious we are about the electricity and the tariffs. And rather than going back and forth and having threats to each other, we have both agreed, let cooler heads prevail. We need to sit down and move this forward.
So it looks like another win for Donald Trump. Doug Ford has stepped back from his threat to charge massive tariffs on electricity coming from Canada into the United States. Now, Donald Trump immediately attacked this plan initially when it came out, kind of saying, why would we even have electricity coming from Canada? I think it's kind of a mutual deal. I'm sure there's electricity that goes from the US into Canada as well. It has to do with the grid and logistics of what's more convenient and what's cheaper, a cheaper way to supply electricity to certain areas of the United States and into Canada from the United States. So there's probably a lot of nuance to it, as there is with many things, especially with two bordering countries that are so close, have such a close relationship. So that will probably, come out as they work through these issues. But Doug Ford seems to have come to a more logical conclusion, and Donald Trump has now decided he's not going to double the tariffs on aluminum and steel that he was going to initially. Now we got Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who has announced other tariffs that are going to go in place, and he wants to continue the war with Trump on these trade disparities as well.
Today, I am announcing that the Government of Canada, following a dollar-for-dollar approach, will be imposing, as of 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, March 13th, 2025, 25% reciprocal tariffs on an additional $29.8 billion of imports from the United States. This includes steel products worth $12.6 billion and aluminum products worth $3 billion, as well as additional imported U.S. goods worth $14.2 billion for a total of $29.8 billion. The list of additional products affected by counter tariffs includes computers, sports equipment, and cast iron products as examples. These tariffs are in addition to Canada's 25% counter tariffs on $30 billion of imports from the United States in response to U.S. tariffs put in place on March 4th. In addition, we learned yesterday that the United States tariffs would also be imposed on steel and aluminum content in certain derivative products. The government is currently assessing this aspect and may impose, of course, further tariffs in response to this measure as well.
And so LeBlanc seems like he wants to take a stab at going toe-to-toe with Donald Trump in a new tariff war. And we'll see how that plays out, because Donald Trump looks like he's pulling no punches. He is coming out strong. He is not going to take any of these tariffs sitting back. And he wants to rebalance the economy, the world economy. He knows that the United States has the stronger position on this, and he's willing to utilize that in order to get companies to bring work back to the United States and to change some of these tariff disparities that are happening right now. Now, like I said, there's a lot of nuance in how the trade disparities are. It seems like a lot of agriculture products are what, Canada wants to tariff because they have a lot of agricultural business in their country, and they don't want the United States to be able to compete because they know the United States can do it cheaper because we are not charging our citizens the tax that Canada is. I was actually reading a report today that was talking about, the top, I don't remember if it was 20% of their wage earners, I think it was, pay 53% taxes. 53%. over the half of their wage are gone in tariffs. And I think it was actually Carolyn Levitt who was saying that, because she was trying to, it was part of her press conference from yesterday, trying to prove how much money Canadians could save by becoming the 51st state of the United States, which is still funny. I know Ben Shapiro has a problem with this. He thinks that the joke's gone too far. I don't know. I still get a chuckle every time. I think there's this kind of like subconscious dispute between the United States and Canada, where Canada has always low-key disliked Americans because they feel like we're not polite. But you know what? The United States was built on fighting against power, right? We were built on that whole premise. If you look at our founding, we came out against the British for a small tax on tea. That was where our tipping point was. Of course, now we've become quite a bit more subdued, but we still have that in our blood a little bit, and the Canadians do not like us for that. Low key, enough to boo our anthem, but probably not more than that. But anyways, here's a question from the American press, or Associated Press rather, who was asking Carolyn Levitt a question about tariffs, trying to be sneaky or something, get the upper hand. I don't know. It was definitely some attitude in there, and she gave it right back.
I'm sorry, have you ever paid a tariff? Because I have. They don't get charged on foreign companies, they get charged on the importers.
And ultimately, when we have fair and balanced trade, which the American people have not seen in decades, as I said at the beginning, revenues will stay here, wages will go up, and our country will be made wealthy again. And I think it's insulting that you're trying to test my knowledge of economics and the decisions that this president has made. I'm now regret giving a question to the Associated Press. Mary.
Boom, she got him. I love Carolyn Levitt. Man, she is not going to pull any punches. Donald Trump picked the perfect person for that job. He's really good at picking people for press secretary, if nothing else. Although I will say his cabinet selections for this term have been chef's kiss superb. But I love watching press conferences with Carolyn Levitt. What a different from Karine Jean-Pierre or even Peppermint Patty under Biden, who was just terrible, man. It was like scratching on a chalkboard listening to either one of them, or getting your teeth pulled, one or the other. But it is just a joy to watch them in command. But anyways, another small little thing that came out today that could blow up into a big news story now is the pardons that Joe Biden did in the last days of his presidency, which we had suspicion that there was somebody else, pulling the strings the whole time, not just with that part, but executive orders that were passed and all kinds of stuff. But now it's coming out that these pardons that he did at the last minute were all done by auto pen, which is basically like, taking a pre-written signature and just clipping and pasting it somewhere. But they all match up. They're exactly the same. And you would have to know, right? Who's never thought about this? Even signing your own signature, that if you did something like that, say you had a stamp for your signature, that somebody's going to notice that all the signatures are exactly the same. Here's a little clip just showing how perfectly all these signatures line up. There they are separately, the people that he pardoned, and they come together and wow, it's like magic. They're all exactly the same. That is pretty crazy, isn't it? This could be a bombshell. And so that could be something that comes up in the future, because only the president can pardon people. So if it's found out now that somebody else was signing his name, because apparently he was also on vacation when this came up. So this could be a huge, huge investigation. All these pardons could be ruled illegitimate in reality, and it would be unprecedented, and it would be very choppy waters to navigate for sure. Now, another big thing that's coming up is that soon we are approaching a fiscal cliff where we need to have this, continuation document signed for the budget. So we're coming to when it's due to be the continuing resolution is due. And now we have Jonathan Jackson, Representative Jonathan Jackson out of Illinois, who is talking about not supporting this bill, and they need some support of Democrats in order for it to reach the majority for this to pass. So it'll be interesting because they could stop this. The Democrats could stop this, but it's always a question of who's going to take the blame for it being stopped. Here's him on that.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, you spoke of the Senate saying the future of this bill depends on your party. We have that sound if you listen to this.
Well, I think as we've done our head count, I think we feel very comfortable that we will deliver a majority vote for this. The question is, can we get the 60-vote supermajority threshold that's necessary to pass it? And in order to do that, we need Democrats.
Do you see Democrats crossing over in the Senate to get this passed to keep the government funded?
Unfortunately, I can see a path for him to get some Democratic votes. I would strongly encourage the colleagues over there not to give him the supermajority. We're talking about the cuts to HUD. Can we be very clear on what's at stake? Housing for veterans, affordable housing. When you take out all the personnel at HUD, 70% of it, who's going to do the new construction for affordable housing? Who's going to do the home inspection for people that need to have their certificates re-upped? Who's going to do the work? So in the name of efficiency, I hope he understands the essential functions the government provides, and that he's not showing any regard for or any understanding of.
I guess he has a very different definition of what efficiency is, doesn't he? He's talking about the efficiency of HUD, but he is talking about the efficiency of being able to just hand out a bunch of money real fast. We address efficiency as how are you spending my money and how can we reduce the amount of my money that you take from me and put towards things that I don't want and I don't support. That's how we define efficiency. He just defines it completely differently. And, you know, it's this obstructionist viewpoint that they just want to stop the budget from passing because they think that it'll hurt Donald Trump. But if the Republicans can frame this to the media properly and say, we are unified with this, with the not counting Thomas Massey, who's just going to vote no for anything that spends money. And I get his point, but we need to get there. Okay. We can't just chop everything out right now. As much as I would love to see that happen, it's not possible to chop that much in this short term. And eventually, I don't know if you can even chop enough without touching entitlements, which even Donald Trump says he has no interest in doing because it is not, their incentive structure is not there to chop entitlements. There are too many people who vote just based on entitlements because they need it or they view others needing it as something that they're interested in, which is unfortunate, but it is the truth of the matter. But this obstructionist viewpoint where I just want to stop something because it's Donald Trump, or I just want to stop something because I think he's going to get the blame, is going to be interesting to see how the American public responds to that and who they point the finger at. Now, typically the finger is pointed at the president because he is deemed to be in charge of the federal government. However, you know, like I said, if the Republicans are unified and can present it properly to the American people, and let's face it, the American people has lost a lot of trust in the leftist media, who usually is the one pushing, you know, the where we should point the finger. So hopefully they can properly frame this. Now, Donald Trump, like I said, met with the Taoiseach Dála of Ireland, and he had some other things to say about the price of oil and the education department. First, let's talk about his comments on oil.
I'm very happy with his oil is down to $65 a barrel. And that's faster than I would have anticipated. We put on the gas, we stepped in the gas in order to get oil, and with what's happening. So we're getting that down. And when energy comes down, prices are going to be coming down with it. So in a very short period of time, we've done a very good job.
What he's saying there is very true, actually. And we understood this from the start, from Biden administration, when they started cutting, when they stopped the pipeline that was being built. We knew that this was going to drive up the price of goods because everything is transported by using oil of some sort, not counting the things that are made from petroleum products, which is also a huge driving factor in the economy. So we knew that that was going to drive prices up, and the Biden administration just wanted to ignore it. Like they want to pretend that electric vehicles can just do everything magically with the snap of their fingers, which is insane. Donald Trump understands that if you reduce the price of oil, you reduce the cost of supplying goods to different areas. Now, he's also going to talk about the education department, which Karen McMahon has been put in charge of and is in the process of dismantling. They laid off over half of their workforce just today, or announced that they will be doing so in the very near future. I know there's a process to it, but here's Donald Trump talking about the ineffectiveness of the education department.
They're not doing a good job, and if you take a look at our education process, and if you look at the charts, because they have numerous charts where they do the top 40, we're at number 37, 38, 39, and 40. And recently they hit, during Biden's last few days, they hit last. So they were number 40, and yet we're number 1 in cost per pupil. So it's pretty bad. But we have a dream. And you know what the dream is? We're going to move the Department of Education. We're going to move education into the states, so that the states, instead of bureaucrats working in Washington, so that the states can run education.
And he makes good points about the education department's ineffectiveness and the fact that this stuff should be put back to the states, like many things. I mean, Donald Trump has had pretty consistent vision on federalism, and which the design of this country was based on federalism, that most of the function of government was to be kept at the state level. I've said this before, I continue to say this, and this is factually true, that the country was pretty divided when it all set out. Each state had quite different ideas on how government should be regulated and how much of an impact they should have on their lives. And the idea behind the structure of our government was that the federal government was really only going to be in control of a couple things. One was going to be national security, the security of our borders. One was interstate commerce, so any dispute that was between states would be handled by the federal government. And really, there was very little else except for making sure that state governments didn't overstep the rights of its citizens. Other than that, everything else was going to be set by the states. And that's the only reason that these states were able to come together as a union. Now, as people wanted to force others to follow in their own viewpoints, the federal government has gotten bloated and out of control, which is what Trump is trying to fix. But man, they are fighting it hard because the leftists have infiltrated the bureaucracies so much, especially the education department. So it would be good to see it dismantled. Now, like I said before, he met with the Choctadala of Ireland at the White House, and this is how some of that went.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to have Micheál Martin, Taoiseach, Ireland. It's a special place, and he's a very special guy. He did it the hard way also. He served, and then he took a little time off, and then he served again. I've heard about that. That happens on occasion. And he's done very well. And we knew each other from a long time ago. But it's a great honor to have you in the Oval Office and have you at the White House. We have tremendous business relationships with Ireland, and that will only get stronger. The relationship we have personally and every other way is very, very strong and very, very good. So I just want to welcome you to Washington, D.C. and to our country, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your hospitality and the warmth of your reception. And I commend you in terms of the work that you're doing, particularly in terms of the pursuit of peace, which we discussed earlier. And I think that's going well. And you really have, in the first sort of 100 days of this government, you've done some extraordinary things very quickly. Everybody's watching in that respect. So.
Thank you.
So it seemed like a very cordial meeting. There were no real bombshell events, no flare-ups at all, but they get along very well. Donald Trump points out the fact that he did a similar thing to what Donald Trump did, as he was in power and then left for a little bit and came back. So they have some similarities there. But the Choctadala pointed out an interesting part of the piece that Donald Trump has been working on in between Russia and Ukraine, and also in the Middle East at the same time. But he also, and he pointed out the fact that Donald Trump's been able to accomplish so much in such a little amount of time. He says the world is watching, and we've noticed the change in the world in these 100 days, haven't we? We've noticed how many countries and media outlets and businesses have changed the structures and their missions so quickly since Donald Trump has been in office. And it just goes to show what a strong leader can do. But he points out about the peace that Donald Trump is working on. And that is a huge change because Joe Biden had no incentive and no push for peace between Ukraine and Russia. He just kept pushing it off and pushing it off, spending more and more of our tax dollars for a war that was going nowhere. And we're going to go to Marco Rubio and talking about this ceasefire deal that they're negotiating right now that Ukraine has agreed to. But Donald Trump, if he were a Democrat right now, would have already received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in trying to negotiate for peace in Ukraine between them and Russia. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, Obama was given, I said, Biden, that was a Freudian slip because they're basically the same administration. But Obama was given the Nobel Peace Prize just for what they assumed he was going to accomplish. He literally was given it for something that he hadn't even done, which is crazy to me. And as soon as that happened, the Nobel Peace Prize had no more value anymore. They ruined it. It was something that was good for a long time, and they ruined it, just like the left destroys everything else. But here's Marco Rubio talking about the peace talks that have been going on overseas.
Today, we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally thank, we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us here today. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball is now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
And the last piece that he mentioned will be the real key to this whole negotiation process is, will Russia come to the table and agree to a ceasefire? Now, there's some conflicting ideas about this. There's some that say that they will not come to the table, that they will be resistant to it. But I've heard things out of Putin that seems to say that he would want to come to the table for a peace deal. Now, this would be a first step towards a longer-term deal. They need to end the fighting. They need to end the killing soon so that they can work on the next step of a lasting peace deal and then ultimately the rebuilding, which the United States will help with this mineral deal. So it's like a phased approach to this whole process, which is common among any kind of end to a war or some kind of military crisis. But I think that Donald Trump has the pieces in order to force Putin to the table. And this is kind of why he went and talked to Putin first, I believe, to try to see what the keys to a peace deal would be for Putin, because he's the other big player in this, the United States and Russia. And then Ukraine basically has to do what we tell them, which is why I consider them a smaller player in this deal. But if Russia does not come to the table or does not agree to something, Donald Trump does have more plays to make. And he definitely has more tools in his toolbox that he can use to get Russia to come to the table. And I think that he will ultimately be able to do this. If anybody can, it's Marco Rubio and Donald Trump. And it'll be interesting to see how that comes to fruition. Now, our last little story of the day, People's Republic of New York, of course, has more unrest. We've talked about the corrections officers, the prison guard strike that's been going on here. They are still having complete chaos in this system, even though many of the officers have ended their strike. The state considers the strike to be over. They fired everybody, over 2,000 employees who did not return to service. And they still have many, many National Guardsmen basically living in these prisons as prisoners of the People's Republic, working to cover the shifts of the corrections officers that they were short. Now, the state was 2,000 people short before the strike started. Now they've fired another 2,000, and they've promised to shorten the shifts of the corrections officers who have returned. So it is an impossible position they've put themselves in. And they've even pushed further. We talked about this yesterday, but the state has pushed further in saying that these corrections officers that did not return to service will now be restricted from ever holding a state job, even county jobs, because a lot of these county sheriffs were willing to hire some of these corrections workers. So now the state is stepping in there too, greatly overstepping its authority. And I hope that they get slapped with a huge court ruling that requires them to pay back pay and restitution to these people whose rights they are seriously violating. But in continuation, now we have left-leaning protesters who have marched into the Capitol building. Now, when the corrections officers protested, they were on the front lawn of the Capitol, which is common and legal. The protesters of the left now are protesting Tom Homan bringing ICE into New York City to take illegal immigrants out of the city, because Kathy Hochul has not really cooperated with this process. So now Homan's going to come in and take the people himself, illegal immigrants. So they're in the Capitol building now, basically an insurrection that, there's state police standing around basically doing nothing because Kathy Hochul has to order it, because the state police will not do anything without her order. They don't want to get themselves in any hot water. They are basically just trying to keep anybody from destroying anything or hurting anybody. But they are protesting, having insurrection in the state capitol, and nobody says a word. Here's that video. So you can see Tom Homan walking through there, who they are all protesting against. And like a boss, smiles and waves, gives maybe even a little thumbs up there, is completely unfazed by all these wacky leftists as he walks right through the crowd. What a boss. He is going to continue doing the work that Donald Trump hired him to do. He is going to clean out all the people who are illegally within these cities. He is going to put an end to sanctuary cities as they stand, and will save taxpayers a lot of money that we're wasting, throwing away at these people that have been put here. And the taxpayers don't want to fund this. This is not something, this is one of the main mandates that Donald Trump was given in this election, was to clean up the cities, get rid of sanctuary cities, get rid of illegal immigrants that have come here that we don't know who they are, and or how long they'll be here, living on taxpayers' dime. It's got to end. Anyways, that's all I have time for today. I want to thank you for joining another episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment below, share with a friend, clip this up and remix it on your own YouTube channel if you want, and come back tomorrow. We'll have another episode of Spark the Conversation. This is your host, Mark the Spark. Don't forget to go out and volunteer for something meaningful. And as always, spark the conversation.